happen while there is a Republican, steering the ship of state, because then the Republican gets blamed, and what the Republican is associated with gets blamed, which is limited government or capitalism, even if it's, even if we didn't have it, even if we had big government and central banking. But the other thing is, it's what president is likely to do the right thing. That's the problem. Although sometimes it's, you could think it's the Democrats. Like, look at what happened in New Zealand with Roger Douglas. I mean, New Zealand finally had their day of reckoning when the liberals, the left wing, was in charge. But, then they did the right thing. Maybe it would have been impossible for the party that was associated with smaller government to do the right thing, but the Labor Party was able to do the right thing. And because, once the Labor Party was willing to cut government, well, then, the National Party, the more conservative party, well, sure, they'd go along with that once the Labor Party agrees to do it. But if you have a conservative party that wants less government, well, the Labor is never going to go along with that. So it's difficult to do it. But I mean, I think given the mindset of the current Democratic Party, how would they ever do the right thing? They're so convinced that socialism works, they would just utilize the opportunity of any crisis to rerun a failed experiment. So, that's the mixed bag. I mean, it'd be better, if everything collapsed and Trump was president, because even though Trump might get the blame, he's more likely to do the right thing, even though he hasn't done the right thing yet, right? So you can't base it on what he's done in the past. You just have to decide who is more likely to eventually do the right thing. And I think that Trump would be more likely to do the right thing in the future than Biden. And especially since Trump, obviously, he doesn't have to, he's not going to have a third term. So it's always more likely that a president in his second term will do better things than a president in his first term, even though there's not necessarily a long history to prove that. But to me, if there was a really bad crisis and somebody didn't have to worry about getting reelected, that person would be more apt to do the right thing than to do the politically expedient thing. Whereas if reelection is still your goal, then you're more likely to sacrifice what's good for the country to do what's more likely to get you reelected. So, for that alone, it makes sense to reelect an incumbent because, he's term limited out. He's not trying to get reelected. In this financial climate, whether a Biden win or a Trump win, should I move forward to starting my trucking and warehousing company? Look, I don't know. I mean, if you have a good business idea and it makes sense, I wouldn't not go forward with it based on who's going to win the election. I mean, I think that most businesses are going to face a more difficult environment in a Biden White House and a Democratic Congress. I mean, you're likely to have more regulation to deal with. So, you're just going to have more barriers in the way of your success. And look, the economy is going to be weak, but look, their businesses are going to survive. And of course, remember, your competitors are also going to have problems. So, you just have to be better than them. And even if there's a smaller pie, as long as you got your share, you can still do well. But, a lot of it is going to depend on, your niche and where in, in the market you're fitting, because there's always going to be economic activity. There's always going to be commerce, even to the extent that it's diminished. And so there will always be opportunities for you to make money. You just have to figure out where those opportunities are and how to take advantage of them, knowing that if you've got barriers, so does everybody else. And maybe you can overcome the barriers that others can't. Isaac Swan, what do you think America gave up on? Why do you think America gave up on independence, freedom, and capitalism? Most of the people I talk to think it's because it's public education. Look, public schools have certainly done a lot to dumb down the American population. And that's another reason to oppose them. But look, this is the natural tendency of societies. I mean, there's nothing new about human nature. I mean, Americans, we've advanced technologically, right? We have a lot more technology today than we did 1,000 years ago. But mentally, we're the same. I mean, we have all the same emotions. We haven't necessarily learned anything from our political mistakes. I mean, we've learned a lot scientifically. I mean, that's part of the interesting things about progress, is that each generation builds on the knowledge from the prior generation when it comes to science, and technology. But when it comes to understanding politics, every generation forgets what the prior generations learned, and it starts from scratch. I mean, it's a good thing we don't do that with our technology. We never would have gotten anywhere. But we just keep acting like history doesn't prove any examples at all. We just make the same mistakes. But, people are envious of one another. People are jealous. And people are willing to, buy into the idea of something for nothing. And so politicians will always play to the lowest common denominator. And, and so to the extent that people start off with a lot of freedom leads to a lot of prosperity. Prosperity leads to unequal distributions of wealth and income, because the people that contribute the most get the most, right? And that's fair, but other people become envious of other people who have succeeded more. And they don't necessarily realize that, they earn more because they deserve more. They helped improve people's lives more. They invented things, they produced things, they were good at doing things, and that's how they accumulated their wealth. People just get jealous and they think, oh, they got lucky, or they cheated, or whatever it is. And then you get some politician that comes around and says, hey, look at this guy, look at all this money he's got. You're just as entitled, you're just as deserving. Let's take some of that money and let's give it to you. Yeah, I'll vote for you. And so you get all this. So prosperity ends up being the source of its own demise. I mean, you start out with all the freedom, and then you get all the prosperity, and then you lose the freedom, and then you lose the prosperity, and you go full circle. Capitalism creates the wealth, and then socialism destroys the wealth. And then eventually the cycle starts over again. And, unfortunately, we're in the cycle where the socialism is in the process of destroying the wealth. And so we're on the downturn. The question is, when do we bottom out, and when do we start the up cycle of restoring freedom and diminishing government? But there can be a long gap between those, because government can get a lot of power, and then it can be very difficult to wrestle away that power and regain your freedom. Because, of course, once the government has the power, it wants to keep it. And it has a lot of force at its disposal, to maintain that power. And sometimes it takes a lot to overcome it. It may take more now than it has in the past, given a lot of the resources and technology that governments today have at their disposal that they didn't have in the past. Somebody's asking me about explaining the mechanics of QE. I already did that. So if you haven't been listening from the beginning, look, I've been talking for a while now, waiting for some results here on this election. Now I'm seeing in news Joe Biden to make a statement shortly. So I don't know if that's not that shortly doesn't sound like it's an hour away. So we'll see. I don't know if we can get a result tonight. Not sure how late I can stay up, because it's already 12:30 in Puerto Rico. When we just got the end of daylight savings time and everybody turned their clocks back, we don't do that in Puerto Rico. So we have the same time all year. And so I'm now an hour ahead of the East Coast. So it's 11:30 on the East Coast. It's 12:30 here in Puerto Rico.